Many have imagined republics and principalities which have never been seen or known to exist in reality. For how we live is so far removed from how we ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather bring about his own ruin than his preservation. Niccolo Machiavelli, basically stating the law of sociological inertia. The building that you see before you was built right around the 9th century AD, and it stood, as you see it, for over 1,000 years before it was bombed out of existence in World War II. There were no advanced building techniques or architectural planning in the 9th century, yet they built a building that looks like it has at least 4 stories, and it stood for over 1,000 years. Just imagine what was lost that fateful day in World War II, 1945. You're telling me a building built in 1981 with architectural advancements and modern materials just collapses because of water and wind and salt in Florida? That doesn't bode well for the other hundreds of thousands of buildings. Funny story though, exact same building, 1 block north, built by the same contractors with the same materials at roughly the same time, seems to not have any problems. No one is asking this question. That's why I started back here. Because we have come to a place now where asking questions is not allowed. However, we can still, to some extent, explore this over on Patreon. Thank you, by the way, to everyone who has gone to my Patreon and watched the videos and joined for the $1 a month or $10 a year fee that is required to put actual thought behind a paywall. Reality is just what reality is. Machiavelli was largely misunderstood, but I did want to read a small excerpt about him so that people can understand we are not advancing at this moment in the world. We are regressing. He was an Italian diplomat, philosopher, politician, historian, and writer who lived during the Renaissance, roughly the 1500s. Machiavelli's name came to evoke unscrupulous acts of the sort he advised most famously in Il Principe, or The Prince. His experience showed him that politics have always been played with deception, treachery, and crime. He also notably said that a ruler who is establishing a kingdom or a republic and is criticized for his deeds, including violence, should be excused when the intention and the result is beneficial. Machiavelli's Prince was much read as a manuscript long before it was published in 1532, and the reaction was mixed. Some considered it straightforward description of the evil means used by bad rulers. Others read in it evil recommendations to tyrants to help them maintain power. Many scholars, such as Leo Strauss, stated that Machiavelli was a teacher of evil. This is what happens when you state things as they are and give people wisdom to understand the world that they're living in. You are seen then as contributing to all bad and all evil, as if anarchy is any better. What did we see in the middle part of the 20th century when anarchy set in? This is what we saw. The loss of so much history, the loss of so much beauty. It can't be calculated. It can't be calculated. It was destroyed in the name of advancement. In fact, the destruction of this building was not done in a strategic way. It was meant simply to demoralize the German people. That was the only reason it was destroyed. I'll give you a link to this Hildesheim, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, city in Lower Saxony, Germany, where there was some of the most absolute beautiful architecture you've ever seen. This is an engraving of that time. The buildings had stood for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. And look what's happened to the world since then. Since that destruction. The world has regressed in culture. But what if? What if there was a place that hadn't suffered under the four horsemen, where war, and famine, and pestilence, and death didn't exist? All this conflict, all this lowbrow debate. Even if the progress were slow, like I've said in other videos, even if the progress were slow, with different priorities, we would see a culture that would develop craft like we're seeing in our skies. Having the ability to shut down nuclear reactors, that's a fantastic ability. Can you imagine? Having the ability to shut down nuclear weapon silos so that cooler heads could prevail? Living insulated with unending amounts of fresh water, heat from volcanoes beneath, volcanic soil. You might evolve to look differently. You might evolve with different values. And speaking of values, Michelangelo. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. This is where we are right now in the world. We have aimed very low and we have achieved that low goal. Many of you have seen images like this before about what women were back in the 40s and 50s and what women and men are now. And the pushback for images like this is, oh, you just want to go back to a time when men were in control of everything and women were just subservient and slaves. Really? Is that what history says? Is that what history says, really? History literally says the exact opposite. This is an image called the Accolade. It is a representation of Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women who ever lived. Truly, and her story was told in Hollywood. I believe the name of the movie was Lion in Winter, Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. This vase was a gift that she gave to her husband, a king. It was given to her by her grandfather. Now, she ruled right around the turn of the second millennia. Look at this vase. This was created over 1,000 years ago. No modern techniques. No CAD/CAM design. No advanced machinery. The beauty is absolutely stunning. And this was 1,000 years ago. Ask your modern liberal woke friends if they know anything about Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was an incredibly powerful ruler. Just real quick. Eleanor of Aquitaine, 1122 to 1204. Queen consort of France and England and Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right. As the heir of the House of Poitiers, rulers in southwestern France, she was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in Western Europe during the High Middle Ages. When was that? High Middle Ages, 1000 to 1250. She was a patron of many, many literary figures, led armies several times in her life, and was leader of the Second Crusade. But of course, by all means, continue with your cancel culture and destruction of masculine value, especially those put out by Machiavelli, the father of republicanism. You know, the idea of having a republic where the people elect leaders to represent them. They don't realize they're heading for tyranny. The leftists, the cancel culture types, they don't realize they're heading for tyranny. Because that's why we see Gavin Newsom's. That's why we see women like the mayor of Chicago. You see, this is the issue. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it. It's too low and we reach it. And that's where we are. Things weren't perfect in the 1950s. Things weren't perfect in the 1850s. But to say that women were never in power, historically, until now, when they're marching in the streets and dressing and acting and pretending like they're men, and vice versa, men giving up on who they are and what they are for some virtue signaling because it's been demonized for so long. That's the answer? That's the fix? As if anything needs fixed. See, they tried to fix things that way in the 1940s, and the damage done was incalculable. This has always been the story. But unless people start speaking without fear and quoting men like Machiavelli, all will be lost. Many have imagined republics and principalities which have never been seen or known to exist in reality, for how we live is so far removed from how we ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done will rather bring about his own ruin than his preservation. And I will leave it there. God bless. Have a happy Sunday. We will, of course, see you tonight on Twitch. And, of course, thank you to everyone who has joined me at Patreon. We will be putting up a video, I believe, either tonight or tomorrow, talking about how there could possibly be an analog building standing perfectly 1 block away with no problems. But we can't discuss that in detail here. So anyway, see you on Twitch tonight. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.